All right, welcome everybody. My apologies again, like I said, for my tardiness. But we will try to pack in everything that we wanted to speak about today, about going up to Har Habayit, as we're going to try to be as economical as we can on the time. And hopefully we'll be able to go through this very large topic, which we're only going to scratch the surface here, about the importance of Har Habayit to our daily and to our Yadut, and to everything that everything that we yearned for over the 2,000 years in Galut. Now that we were zochet to come back to Eretz Yisrael, a lot of people are happy, and they're just, they're okay. We've managed to make it. We've gone on to, we're back home. But many people seem to forget the actual essence of what we are. And of course, it is our job, our responsibility as Jews, from this land, from this ancient land that God gave to our forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Now that we have the zchut to come back to be here, right? We shouldn't be satisfied with just living in a state where we're in between, as I like to say, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. We're metaken everything that we've suffered throughout the Dorot. We've now managed to correct those things. The one thing that we have not finished and finalized is Binyan Beit Hamikdash, which we'll hopefully discuss at the end of this shiur. But let's start from the beginning. Everybody here recognizes this place, right? It's something that we're all intimately familiar with. To some people, it invokes a very special feeling when they come to pray at this place. But is this everything that it's meant to be, right? This is the nice view that those who have been zochet to go up to Har Habayit have definitely seen. Is this everything? Is this what we're here? Is this what we're meant to daven by? What's special and unique about this little section of this wall? What's about this little place? And if we look at a bird's eye view, we will see that this tiny section of wall right over here is only a very small section of the entire western wall. And the western wall is not the only wall that's there. There's also the southern wall. As you can see from this vantage point, it's intact. You can see, if you go around the other side to the eastern wall, the eastern wall is intact. The northern wall is intact. So what's special, what's miuchad about this little stretch of wall, and why is this something that most people, when they come to the Kotel, they feel like, okay, I've gotten there, this is it. But is there more? Is there something more? So in order to appreciate and talk about the Beit Hamikdash itself, or why we go to this Makom Hamikdash, we need to talk about itself. What is the significance of the Makom Hamikdash? So throughout the Mikorot and Chazal, the Makom Hamikdash is referred to as the Lev Shel HaOlam. It's the heart of the world. And when God created the world, the very first thing He created was the Even HaShtiyah, as the Gemara in Masechet Smachot, it's also in many Midrashim says, Mimenu Hushtat HaOlam. That God, from it, meaning from the Even HaShtiyah, from this very first thing that God created when He created the world, from it sprang forth the world. V'lekach nikret Even Shtiyah, and therefore it's referred to as the foundation stone. Shemimena hitchil HaKadosh Baruch Hu livro et olamo. From it, everything sprang forth. This spot, as Rambam writes, was also the very spot of many milestones in our history. Rambam, when he is writing where the location where we must build the Mizbeach, he writes that Umesorat biyad hakol. It is a tradition in the hands of all. She'hamakom shebano bo David u'Shlomo hamizbeach begoran aravna, the place where King David and King Solomon built their altar on the threshing floor of Aravna, hu hamakom shebana bo Avraham hamizbeach ve'akad alav Yitzchak. It is the very same spot where Akedat Yitzchak took place. Now, we all know that Akedat Yitzchak is one of the most seminal moments in our history. It is when we have to invoke the memory of one event on the holiest day of the year, which is that event that we invoke and we beg God to forgive us. It's that event of Akedat Yitzchak on Rosh Hashanah itself, on the day that we're being Mamlech HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is the day that we pick out this Akedat Yitzchak to remember and to put into our consciousness. And that spot where the Beit Hamikdash was built, was on over that very same spot. But that's not all. V'hu hamakom shebana bo Noach keshiyatza min hateva. Now, Noach, after the flood, landed on Har Habayit. Har Habayit is a mountain in northern Turkey. Instead of building an altar there, which is what you might expect, right? He finally has finished this entire story, 40 days, 40 nights in this teva with all the animals, and now that's it. It's over. You would think as soon as he got on dry land, the very first thing he would do is build a mizbeach and offer a sacrifice, right? As Chazal tell us, the reason why he brought seven animals, kosher animals, was so that he could bring korbanot. And that's not what he did. He didn't stop at that location. He traveled all the way from northern Turkey, all the way back to this specific mountaintop in Jerusalem. And on that spot is where he brought his offering. As we know, Cain and Hevel had the very first battle of what type of korban is the ultimate korban. Is it supposed to be from the choicest or the Benoni, or even worse technically? And is it supposed to be from animals or from produce? And we know the story, what happened after they offered their offerings. One was accepted and the other wasn't, and Cain and Hevel ended up having a fight about it. But it was at that spot. But it's not really, they weren't the first person to come up with this idea of bringing a korban. Ubol hikrav Adam harishon korban kishenivra umisham nivra. Says Rambam, the very first person to bring a korban was Adam harishon, the very first person who was created. And not only did it bring a korban at that spot, that was the spot where he was created from. Amul Chazal, Amul Chachamim, Adam mimakom kaparato nivra. We always hear that God, sometimes sends the refuah kodem lamaka. This is the very first makar that we have that. From the very place where God chose to create man, that is the spot where there is the ultimate connection. That is that same spot that Even Hashtiyah, that the entire world is created from. This spot here is also where mankind, the purpose of this world, was created. And from here, it all goes through. So we see so far, let's just recap what we've gone through so far. We've had God created the world. The very first thing was the Even Hashtiyah. From there, Adam Arishon was created. Adam, recognizing that this is the ultimate spot of connection, built a mizbeach and brought an offering there. Cain and Hevel, taking it a step further, brought their offerings there. Noach traveled all the way from Turkey to bring a korban there. And then Akedat Yitzhak takes place on that very mountain. Another source that I didn't bring in this presentation, there are many, many more that I'm not going to bring in this presentation, but I'll just mention it briefly. Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer mentions that when Yitzchak and Rivka did not have children for 30 years, they went to Har Habayit and they davened. Vayitze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh. Chazal tell us that was on Har Habayit. And from there, they were answered with twins. Moving on to the next seminal moment throughout our history, Yaakov and Esav have their fight. Yaakov steals the brachot from Esav, and now Esav wants to kill Yaakov. And Rivka tells Yaakov, time to run away, go to Haran, which is also located somewhere in northern Turkey. And Yaakov Avinu travels all the way from Beersheba, and he passes all the way up towards Turkey. And he almost gets to his location, where he says he's 5 minutes out. And he realizes, I forgot to pray where my forefathers' prayer. Is it possible that I passed that spot? He backtracks all the way back to Israel. Journey of many, many days. He gets to Bethel, which is just a few miles or kilometers north of Jerusalem. From there, Chazal tell us, Kafza Makom. And he ends up in Har Habayit. And he goes to sleep. Vayachalom, v'inei sulam mutzav alza v'rosha magia shamayma, v'inei malachei Elohim olim v'yodim bo. And he has this dream. The ladder, and angels are going up and down. Vayikatz Yaakov misheneto vayomah. Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh v'onachi lo yadati. Yaakov Avinu awakes. He realizes, it hits him. The realization of where he fell asleep, where he had slept. Vayira vayomar ma norah hamakom hazeh. Ein ze ki im bet Elokim v'zeh shar hashamayim. He proclaims, this must be the house of God and the gateway to heaven. As we mentioned, the Gemara that says that Avraham kara har, Yitzchak kara sadeh, Yaakov kara bayit. And those are the sources that we referenced. But we learned something important from this pasuk. First of all, the fact that Yaakov Avinu didn't realize where he slept. Like, you don't think on the anniversary of the Kedat Yitzchak there was a major Yartzei party with the whole Suda. But now Yaakov experienced it himself. And when he himself had that experience, and I'm sure anybody who's ever been to Har Habayit can explain that once you go onto Har Habayit, it's your own experience when you come to that Akara in yourself. We also learn from this, as Medrash tells us, and also Ibn Ezra says, Ki im bet Elokim, sheyitpalel adam bo b'shat tzarko, v'tishmat tefilato, lama? Ki hamakom nivcha. The place is chosen. There's another famous Medrash brought in Pirkei Belezer, made famous by Yeshiva Boys Choir, for those who don't understand the reference. השכים יעקב בפחד גדול ואומר, ביתו של הקדוש ברוך הוא במקום הזה, שנאמר, וירא ויאמר, מה נורא המקום הזה. מכאן אתה למד, שכל המתפלל במקום הזה בירושלים, כאילו התפלל לפני כיסא הכבוד. That anybody who prays in this specific spot in Jerusalem is as if they're praying in front of the heavenly throne. ששער השמיים שם הוא, there's the gateways to heaven is there. Upetach patuach l'shmoya tefillah. The doorway is always open to listen to prayer. Shenemar v'zeh shar hashamayim. As it says, this is the gateway to heaven. Now, let's just take a step back and think about it logically for a second. You would think, the famous nursery rhyme that was made famous by Uncle Maishi, for those who get the reference, right? Hashem is there, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. You would think that one should be able to pray and serve Hashem wherever they are. But that's not what Chazal tell us. Chazal tell us that from the creation of the world, there's one specific spot that was set aside as the ultimate place of prayer, of connection, of repentance. And that is the Makom Hamikdash. It's not even referred to as anything else in the Torah except for Hamakom, the place. Because that is that spiritual portal between the physical world and the spiritual heavens. So while you might think, well, great, I can daven in Lakewood. I could pray in Muncie. I can pray in Montreal or in London or anywhere. No.
This is a Tina, correct?
What? Tina. Sorry. All right. Here we go. Yeah, I don't think anybody in Teaneck thinks they can pray in Teaneck, though. All right. They go off the fear lawn. The place where God has chosen, that specific portal, is in this spot on Har Moriah. So moving forward, Shlomo HaMelech begins construction on this spot, and he starts to build the Beit Hamikdash. And after the Pesukim and Melachim, Perichet, tells us all about the construction. And then after he finishes the construction, he starts the process of the Shivat Yimei HaMiluim. Right? We just learned about it I'm sorry, no, that's, I'm confusing what my son just learned in Chumash in Parshas Tetzaveh. But yeah, next week's Parsha of the Karbanot or this week's Parsha next week's Parsha in Parshas Naso, where it says all the Karbanot. The process, the 7-day process of consecrating the Mikdash. And the Pesukim tell us that Shlomo HaMelech had this massive prayer, that he specifically beseeched Hashem, that this spot here, this Beit HaMikdash, should be the ultimate place of prayer for any type of prayer. I'm not going to go through the entire Pesukim, but you can see it on the screen. This is all part of the Pesukim talking about this, the power of this place. And the Pesukim continue. Rav ki ha'baretz, dever ki yesh, shidafon, yerakon, arbe, chasil, any type of calamity or tzara. Ki yatsa lo yevoch be'eretz sha'arav, kol nega, kol machala. Kol tefila, כל תחינה אשר תהיה לכל אדם, לכל עמך ישראל, אשר ידעון איש נגע לבבו, ופרס כפיו אל הבית הזה. No matter the reason, but if a person has something that's bothering them, and they come to this spot, ואתה תשמע השמיים, שלמה המלך begs Hashem, and now, may the heavens listen, מכון שבתך, וסלחת ועשית, and you should forgive them, and take action. למען ידעון כל עמי הארץ את שמך, ליראה אותך כעמך ישראל, ולדעת כי שמך נקרא לבית הזה אשר בניתי. That everybody should know that your name is on this house. I didn't build it for myself, right? Many kings throughout history set off, grandiose architectural projects so that they would be remembered in the annals of history. Shlomo Melech is saying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm not doing this for my own kavod. I have everything I need. I'm doing this for you. This house should be known as your house. And what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu answer him in the next parak after going through all this tefillah? Vayomer Adonai elav, שמעתי את תפילתך ואת תחינתך אשר חננת אני לפני, הקדשתי את הבית הזה אשר בנית, לשום שמשם עד עולם, והיה ועיני וליבי שם כל הימים. God answers, I accept your prayer, and I will set my name at this spot forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there. Chazal tell us that, in the Gemara Masechet Tzmachot, says, שמתחילה לא בנה שלמה הבית אלא על תנאי, שכל מי שיש לו צרה יבוא ויתפלל עליה. That anybody who has any sort of need will come to this spot. רב כי יהיה בארץ כל תפילה, כל תחינה, שיהיה תכל אדם, as we saw in the פסוקים. אין לי אלא ליחיד. Maybe this means that if a person has a personal prayer, he can go to Har Habayit and he can be answered. L'tzibur minayin, how do we know that as a tzibur, if we have a communal need that we can go to Har Habayit and be answered? Talmud loma. L'chol amcha Yisrael. Ein li ela liYisrael, lenachem yinayin. Maybe that's only for the Jewish nation. But what about for non-Jews? Can they also have access? Talmud lomar v'gam lenachri asher lo me'amcha Yisrael nu. That even non-Jews have a place and a power that they come to Har Habayit and they pray and their prayers will be answered. Mevakesh banim ma'afil nisachim minayin. How do you know that? Maybe we would think that this type of prayer is only good for anybody who has a serious need, right? Someone's really sick, or there's a national need. We need to win a war. Well, I don't know. Maybe I just want something personal. I want a new iPhone, new MacBook, new car. How do I know that I can go there and also be guaranteed that prayer will be answered there? Talmud lomar kol tefila kol tchina. And I'll just point out as an aside, people spend all sorts of time and effort going all over the world to supposed holy spots. So just that their tefillas will be answered just a little bit more. They go to Miron, they go to Uman, they go to the Rebbe's All, they go to Tinek, right? But the one place where God himself is guaranteed that prayer is answered is on Har Habayit. And how many people have not yet gone and taken advantage of that? Continuing along this theme, we know, as we mentioned, that as Shlomo Melech davened, that even if a Jew in the exile, if he has no access to Har Habayit, he should be able to pray, and his prayers will go to that spot and go up to heaven. The Gemara in Barachot Daf Lamed Amud Bet says, "Haya omed b'chutz la'aretz yichaven et libo keneged Eretz Yisrael, shenemar v'yitpalalu elecha derech artzam. Haya omed be'eretz Yisrael yichaven et libo keneged Yerushalayim, shenemar v'yitpalalu el Hashem derech ha'ir asher b'charta." Right? Anybody stands in Israel, they're in Tzfat or Meron, they're going to face south. They're in Beersheba, they're going to face north. They're in Tel Aviv, they're going to face east. Haya omed b'Yerushalayim, the only city in the entire world where every Beit Knesset faces a different direction. Haya omed b'Yerushalayim yichaven et libo keneged Beit Hamikdash, shenemar v'yitpalu el habayit hazeh. Haya omed b'Beit Hamikdash, and someone is standing on Har Habayit, yichaven et libo keneged Beit Kodshei HaKodashim, shenemar v'yitpalu el hamakom hazeh. So at this point, we've seen the intense and immense power that prayer has on Har Habayit. That not only is it the ultimate place to pray, and ideally one should be going specifically to that spot to pray, but even if you're not in that spot, if you push your prayers towards that location, the prayers will go up to heaven from there. But how do we know that that's once the Beit Hamikdash was destroyed? Maybe that was only when the Beit Hamikdash was built. Says Rambam, אף על פי שמקדש היום חרב בעוונותינו, חייב אדם במוראו כמו שהיה נוהג בו בבניינו. Person still has to treat it with reverence, just as he did when the Beit Hamikdash was built. לא ייכנס אלא למקום שמותר להיכנס לשם, one may only enter the permitted areas, ולא ישב בעזרה, one is not allowed to sit in the area of the azara, ולא יקל ראשו כנגד שער מזרח, and one is not to act with lightheadedness opposite the eastern gate. Shenemar, et shabtotai tishmoru umikdashi tirau. My Shabbos you should watch, and my mikdash you should treat with awe. Ma shmirat Shabbat leolam, just as Shabbat is forever. Nobody's going to tell you that once the Beit Hamikdash was destroyed, no, that's it, we don't need to keep Shabbat anymore. Af more mikdash leolam. She'af al pi shecharav bikdushato omed. Even after the Beit Hamikdash was destroyed, it still retains its holiness. And the Midrashim, Rambam continues, "V'lama ani omer b'mikdash v'Yerushalayim kedusha rishona kitcha le'atid level." Why do I say that once Jerusalem is consecrated, it retains its holiness forever? Lefi shekedushat hamikdash v'Yerushalayim. Why is there holiness in Jerusalem and the Mikdash? V'pnei hashchina, because the divine presence resides there. V'shchina eino batla. The divine presence never dissipates. And even though it says that they will desolate your mikdash, even though it's devastated, it still stands in its holiness. Continues the Midrash. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, ben shecharev Beit Hamikdash uben shelo charav, whether it was destroyed or not, ein hashchina zaza mitocho. The divine presence never leaves. Shenemar Hashem behechal kadsho. God is in His holy sanctuary. Even though God's home is in the heavens, and that's where His heavenly throne is, Shchinato beBeit Hamikdash. His divine presence resides in the Beit Hamikdash. Shenemar v'haya'eni v'libi sham kol hayamim. My eyes and my heart will be there for all days. And I will answer you from the holy mountain, Selah. Chazal learned from there that even though it's just a mountain, meaning there's no building there, there's nothing there, it still retains its holiness. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Rei maktiv ki ata tetzei mekarea v'shachanta basadeh. V'shachanti ksiv. And I shall dwell there. She'afal pi shecharav, even though it was destroyed, shchinati omedet sham. My divine presence still stands there. And now my favorite medrash that people very conveniently leave out the three very important words. Amar Rabbi Acha, Leolam ein hashchina zaza mikotel ma'avi shel Beit Hamikdash. The Shechina never leaves the western wall of the Beit Hamikdash, not Har Habayit, of the Azara itself. Shenemar, hinezeh omed achar kotlenu, because I am standing behind the walls. What that means is that and this makes a lot of sense. Where was the Shechina in the Beit Hamikdash? In the Kodesh HaKodeshim. What was the closest wall to the Kodesh HaKodeshim? The Kotel Maravi of the Azara. And that's what it means. That all this is continuing along the same idea that we've already established through the Midrashim, that even though the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, the Shechina stays in the same spot. Okay. So now that we've established that the Beit HaMikdash still retains its Kedusha, now let's get into this idea of what is that Kedusha and how is it relevant today. So, over here we have a map of Bnei Yisrael camping around the Mishkan in the Midbar. When they were in the Mishkan, they camped in Machane Yisrael, right? Around the Mishkan, where all the Shvatim lived, was Machane Yisrael. Slightly inside was where the Leviim lived, Machane Leviyah. And in the absolute center was the Mishkan itself, known as Machane Shechina. The pasuk in Parshas Naso tells us as follows: Tzavet Bnei Yisrael v'shalchu min ha'machane kol tzarua v'chol zav v'chol tamei lanafesh. 3 types of tumah. Send out of the camp anybody who has tzarat, anybody who has zav. We'll discuss what zav means in B'emshech, and tamei met. Someone who comes in contact with a dead body has to be sent out of the camps. So you might think that one should be sent. Anybody with any of those type of tumot have to be sent out of all 3 camps. Rashi, quoting from a Gemara in Psachim, Daf Pezayin Amud Bet, says as follows: Hatzarua nishtar chutz lekulam. The Mitzora, someone who said lashon hara, he gets a tzarat on his hand, on his arm. He shows it to Kohen. The Kohen looks at it and says, "Sorry, pal, you're tamei." He has to go out of all 3 camps, and he has to wait there for 7 days. This is part of the purification process. And afterwards, he goes back to the Kohen. The Kohen looks at it and says, "Okay, you didn't do enough tshuva. Another 7 days." Finally, he does enough teshuvah. It goes away. He's able to shave and to go to the mikvah and has to bring a korban. Whole process. Hazav, continues Rashi, which is again the Gemara in Psachim. Hazav mutar b'machane Yisrael. Someone who becomes tamei from tumat zav is allowed to stay in machane Yisrael, mishalach min hashtayim, but is not allowed to be in machane Leviyah or Shechina. V'tamei met, v'tamei lanafesh, mutar af b'shel Leviyah. Someone who is tamei met is allowed in machane Yisrael and machane Leviyah. Ve'ein mishalech el mishal Shechina. We only send him out from machane Shechina. So therefore, going back to our map, someone who had tzarat, not allowed to be in Machane Yisrael at all. He has to go all the way out most famous person we know who that happened to was Miriam Hanaviyah. And to her great credit, because of how important she was, Am Yisrael did not travel until she was allowed to come back into the camp. But someone else who had gone Sarat during the time as Am Yisrael was in the Midbar, they would have to go outside and they would have to travel outside the Anei Kavod, which opened them up to all sorts of risks. A Zav was allowed to be Machane Yisrael. Someone from Shevet Levi became Tamei Zav, just went out to Machane Yisrael until he became Tahor from his Tumah. A Tamei Met was allowed in Machane Yisrael and Machane Leviah, but not in Machane Shechina. So this might be very relevant to when Am Yisrael is in the Midbar, but what does it have to do with today? Says the Gemara in Zevachim Kuf Tetzayin Amud Bet. Kishem shemachane beYerushalayim, kach machane. Kishem shemachane beMidbar, kach machane beYerushalayim. Just as there were camps in the Midbar, there were also camps in Jerusalem. Yerushalayim laHar Habayit, Machane Yisrael. The city of Jerusalem, up to the boundaries of Har Habayit, is considered Machane Yisrael. Mehar Habayit lishar Niknor, meaning all of Har Habayit up to the entrance of the Azara, Machane Leviah. Mikan ve'elech, meaning from that point forward, Machane Shechina. So meaning from Shari Nikanor to the back of the Azara, that is considered Machane Shechina. So if we use this map that we find in Mishnayot Midot, Yerushalayim, Machane Yisrael. A Metzora is not allowed in Yerushalayim. Har Habayit, Machane Leviah. A Zav and a Balkari is not allowed in Machane Leviah. And if they go inside, their Onesh is Malkut. Okay? I know some rabbi once told me that, what do you mean? The Zav is not allowed to go to Har Habayit, it's Issur Karet. No, it's not Issur Karet. Issur Karet is only for a Tamei Met that enters into Machane Shechina de'oraita, which means from Shari Nikanor to the back of the Azar, within the blue. The rest of it, the area inside the Chel, is only added midirabanan. That was the Chatzar Chadasha that was added during the times of Chizkiyahu HaMelech, which we'll talk about b'hemshech. Okay. So you may tell me this is all nice and theoretical, but how do we know where the Beit Hamikdash stood in Har Habayit? If we don't know where the Beit Hamikdash stood in Har Habayit, we have to assume anywhere on Har Habayit is potentially an area of Machane Shechina, and therefore going there as Tamei Met, which we all are, unfortunately, unless someone is a Kohen and knows for a fact that they're not come in contact with any dead body, meaning they weren't born in a hospital, we would have to avoid going to Har Habayit. So that's really a misnomer, because as we're going to see, if we can identify one location on Har Habayit with certainty that was, let's say, for example, the Makom HaMizbeach, or even the Makom HaKior, if we knew that was the location, we would be able to map out exactly where the Beit HaMikdash stood, because we have Mishnayot Midot, which tells us to the Amma how the Beit HaMikdash was laid out. What I'm going to demonstrate right now, and this is all Mikorot that are found in a Sefer HaMesorat HaMakom HaMikdash, tracing the longest standing Mesorah from Churban Bayit Sheni till today, that the location of the Kodesh HaGadashim never left our eyes, never left our collective consciousness. And as a result, once we know that location, we'll be able to, as long as we can prove definitively that that is the location through this Mesorah, which I'm going to bring only a very small amount of Mekorot, because obviously we'd be here for a week if I had to bring every Mekor that's found in that Sefer. Let's start off right after Churban Bayit Sheni. Unlike after Churban Bayit Rishon, when Am Yisrael was sent out to Galut, after Churban Bayit Sheni, most of the people that were living in the land of Israel stayed in the land of Israel. As we see, roughly for about 70 years, they sort of had some pockets of prosperity until Hadrian came roughly 70 years later and attempted to build a temple to Jupiter on Har Habayit, which kicked off the Bar Kokhba revolt, which led to the Tkufa that we're in now, where the 12,000 Talmidim, and I purposely said 12,000 and not 24,000, based on the Girsa of Reb Shri Gaon of the Gemara in Yevamot. He says, Shneim 10,000 Talmidim, not Sukkot Talmidim, Hayu elo leRabbi Akiva, v'kulam metu b'shat hashmada. They all died out during the Shmad, meaning the Bar Kokhba revolt, which makes a lot of sense because Rabbi Akiva thought Bar Kokhba was Mashiach. And therefore, of course, all of his students would fight in the army of Mashiach. Someone should have let those 8 Snick guys know at Yerushalayim. All right. Says the Midrash, Afal pi shecharav Beit Hamikdash, lo bitlu pa'amei regalim gimel pa'amim b'shana. After Churban Bayit Sheni, Am Yisrael continued every Chag to go up to Har Habayit and to do Aliyah L'Regel, because they were still in the land. As we just mentioned, Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim came to Yerushalayim roughly 70 years after Churban Bayit Sheni, as part of the conquering Bar Kokhba armies. The Gemara Makot at the end tells us what happened. V'kvar haya Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva. They came up to Har Tzofim. Shuv pam achat haya olim liYerushalayim. Kivan shegiu lahar Tzofim, meaning the northern ridge looking over the Temple Mount. Once you, as part of an army, once you conquer that northern ridge, we'll have our resident soldiers tell us exactly how this works. Sadly, I was not yet zoche. They keep denying my request to join. But yes, once you conquer that ridge and you look down over, there's nothing else stopping you. There's no natural boundary that's blocking you from Har Habayit. So Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim, as part of the conquering Bar Kokhba armies, conquering Jerusalem, they come to Har Tzofim. Kivan shegiu lahar Tzofim karu bigdeim. They ripped their clothing. They saw the destroyed Beit Hamikdash in front of them. Kivan shegiu lahar Habayit, meaning they went down in the valley and back up onto Har Habayit. Now they're on Har Habayit itself. Ra'u shual sheyatzam bibeit kodshei HaKodashim. They see a fox that is leaving the ruins of the Beit Hamikdash, of the Kodesh HaKodashim. Hitchilu hein bochin, v'Rabbi Akiva mitzachek. They start to cry, and Rabbi Akiva starts to laugh. Let's take a step back to see what's going on here. These are the conquering Mashiach army has conquered Jerusalem. They're about to rebuild the Beit Hamikdash. If you don't understand the historical context, and you read that Gemara, you think the Chachamim are the normal ones, and Rabbi Akiva is the unique one. And yes, even his answer afterwards, that we see a shual, sheyatzam bibeit kodesh HaKodashim, we saw that kiyum hanuvua, so too we're going to see the kiyum hanuvua, that any one of you can go right now to Yerushalayim and see with your own eyes, of od yeshivu zekenim u'zekenot b'chovot Yerushalayim, u'b'chovot ha'ir yimalu yeladim v'yeladot misachakim b'chovotah. The streets are filled with children playing and laughing, and elderly people sitting on the benches in the Chorva Square. That kiyum of the nevuah of Zechariah has come true. But when you understand it in context, that they were coming as part of Mashiach's army, they're coming to rebuild Beit Hamikdash, you start realizing the Chachamim are the ones that are unique here. What are you doing crying? Do you not realize what you're doing? Sadly, we know how the story ended. Unfortunately, Bar Kokhba was not Mashiach, and for 2,000 years we've been waiting to return. But that wasn't the last time that Am Yisrael was on Har Habayit. There are many more Makorot throughout the Tkufat Tanaim and Amoraim of people on Har Habayit. We have a Gemara with Reb Zera that he saw such a large crowd that he made the special bracha of seeing a tremendous amount of people on Har Habayit. Many other sources. Thank you so much. But another Gemara that I brought here is towards the end of the Tkufat Amoraim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol neh b'dvaro. This is a Gemara in Yerushalmi Pesachim. Rabbi Yochanan ben Medaya b'shem Rabbi Pinchas. From this we see there's a whole debate in the Gemara there. When does one need to take off their shoes? Do they need to take off their shoes? Because once you go into Machna Leviyah, you're not allowed to wear leather shoes. Do you have to take them off before you enter onto Har Habayit? Or can you go through the doorway still wearing shoes and remove your shoes then? And Rabbi Yochanan ben Medaya brings a proof from watching the rabbis who had gone onto Har Habayit. He saw they already took their shoes off from Tachat HaGuf, and that's how he ruled. Again, showcasing that the rabbis had gone onto Har Habayit, and this is roughly 300 years after the Bar Kokhba revolt. Moving on to the Tkufa of the Umayyads. The Umayyads conquered Jerusalem in the year 638. And once they conquered Jerusalem, they also had help, according to many sources, from the Jews that were not fans of the Byzantines. And once they conquered Jerusalem, Omar ibn Khattab conquered Jerusalem, and then Abdul Malik built the Dome of the Rock, the Kippah Zahav that you see in the picture. And then that was completed in the year 692. In the year 715, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is slightly to the south of the Dome of the Rock, was completed as well. Now, is there anything unique about this particular building, and why was it built there? So we actually have many, many sources, both Jewish, Christian, and Muslim sources, that all attest to the same thing. I've brought only here the Jewish ones, but in the Sefer Masarat HaMakom HaMikdash, you can find all the sources, including the Christians and Muslim sources there, from their historians. The Omar, and this story is brought over, pretty much the same story with different variations, that Omar ibn Khattab, when he conquered Jerusalem, he asked the elders of the Jews regarding this particular rock, the peak of Har Moriah. Halai hu even hashtia, is it not the foundation stone? And the Jews basically showed him the location that they had safeguarded for all this time, right? If Jews are continuing to go to Har Habayit, clearly they know where the Makom Hamikdash stood because they were Tamemet, they cannot go into Machane Shechina. As tzivua ki tivne ala sela kippah shetetzavu azav. He commanded that they should build over the rock a dome, a golden dome. Another source from that time, this is in the Gezei HaGeonim. This is actually a very important source because this particular letter was written by the Rashi Yeshivot from Yerushalayim, roughly the year 980, trying to, as all good rabbis do, raise money for the Keilah in Yerushalayim. And part of the letter they wrote all about what Jewish life was like in Yerushalayim at the time. And they write as follows: and it's from God, this. Who allowed the Arab king to treat us with kindness. From once they conquered Jerusalem from the hands of the Edom, from the Byzantines. Our Chachamim showed the Arabs where the Beit Hamikdash stood, and we have dwelled with them from that day until this time. Another great source that's written that's found in Megillat HaMegaleh from Ram ben Ruchia Nasi, and he lays out the story as well. The Arabs treated us with kindness. And they not only allowed us to go to Har Habayit, but they also built for us a Beit Tfilah u'Midrash. Any Jew that was nearby, they would go up during the holidays, during the Chagim, and they would pray inside. And they set up certain prayers to basically invoke the Tmidim and Musafim because they were not allowed to bring Korbanot itself. And this is how the Temple operated throughout all the days of the Umayyad conquest, until the Crusaders came and conquered Jerusalem, and they removed the Umayyads from power. And basically from that point forward, they put their idols inside, and they prevented the Tamid from continuing. And from that point forward, Jews were basically not really allowed in Jerusalem itself. I actually have it pretty much translated in English if anybody wants to read it. While I take some water.
What does that mean? They stopped the Tamid from...
Basically stopped allowing the prayer of the Tamid that was there. Again, a lot of this is a totally separate topic that we can also spend a share on if you ever want. How the evolution of tefillah and how we arrived at where our tefillah today is through Nusach Ashkenaz and Sfard and Ari. If you go back to the Tkufat HaGeonim, there's actually a project that was done by a few Talmidei Chachamim and experts in the Geizot, trying to resurrect the Siddur Eretz Yisrael. What was the prayers like in Eretz Yisrael? There's two Siddurim that came after there, Siddur Nusach Eretz Yisrael and Siddur Shabechi Yerushalayim. Davening is significantly shorter. Maybe we should start a movement to start praying that Nusach here.
We're doing Efrat.
Yeah. Listen, Minhag HaMakom, that was the Minhag not so far away, So anyway, yes, there are various different tefillot that were added and told the structure roughly around the mid-Rishonic period is where Nusach Ashkenaz and Sfard sort of comes to take shape as is today, and that's taking Nuschot from Bavli and Nuschot from Yerushalmi. The Kalir wrote many poems, and he was based in the Gaonic period. Either way, putting that all aside, the tefillot that they davened were probably miyuchad for Har Habayit, and we don't have any specific manuscripts that survived that tell us what those specific tefillot were, but it was known that this was the tefillot that they used to say. So I would imagine when they stopped allowing those tefillot, they basically prevented those tefillot from being said, or the Jews themselves decided to stop saying because they were no longer on Har Habayit. During that Crusader period, a very illustrious visitor arrived in Israel. He was actually running away from Spain. He managed to make it to on his way. The Rambam actually, through his travels, he falls off the map for a period of about 20 years. Nobody really knows where he was. Somehow he ends up on the shores of Akko in 1166. And he manages to travel to Jerusalem. Now remember, this is during Crusader rule. So it's not the Arabs that he was under, but under the very Jew-hating Christians that were in control of the land at the time. And he managed to travel from Akko to Jerusalem, and he goes up to the Temple Mount. On Tuesday, on the 4th day of Cheshvan, Shnat Shisha v'Esrim Li'Yetzirah, Yatzanu me'Akko la'alot liYerushalayim tachat sakana. We left Akko to attempt to reach Jerusalem under great danger. V'nechnasti labayit hagadol v'akadosh, and I entered the great and holy house. V'etpalalti bo, and I prayed there. B'yom Hey, on Thursday. Vav yamim l'erech ma'Cheshvan, on the 6th day of Cheshvan. And just in case you didn't believe me, because you thought I may have made that up, here is Rambam's own Ksav Yad, where he writes it himself, and you could take his word for it, not mine. V'nechnasti labayit hagadol v'akadosh v'etpalalti bo. Not only that, Rambam continues that he made 2 days a chag for him and the rest of his family. The day he arrived in Eretz Yisrael, Yom Ha'atzmaut, and the day that he went up to Har Habayit, Yom Yerushalayim, obviously. Come on. How long both of them, please?
What does he mean by the Beit Hamikdash?
You tell me. You tell me. You say, do you Benjamin? Do you say Birkat HaMazon? Maybe you do Nesach Eretz Yisrael. And not only that, this is the same Rambam who holds so clearly he didn't enter into the area of the Azara, but he entered onto Har Habayit. Now, there are many sources. You can look in Sefer Laman Beit Hashem Elokeinu Avak Shetov Lach, where he goes through like an entire parak of showing that Har Habayit is referred to as Beit Hamikdash. Multiple places. In fact, the Arabs use that as well. If you ever go to Har Habayit, you can see on Sha'ar Achamim, there's a sign there that says Beit Al-Maqdis, Alms and Zakal Committee. Beit Al-Maqdis in Arabic is Beit Hamikdash. The Al-Haram Al-Sharif that they refer to, meaning the noble sanctuary of the Temple Mount, was a reference to the Beit Hamikdash, not to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. But Rambam in another source, in Igeret Rambam in page 222, he writes as well, Shehu, Sha'ani, V'hu, V'avi Mori Zatzal, V'ata, Arbatenu, the four of us, halachnu bebeit Hashem beragesh. We walked in the house of God with awe. So Rambam himself went to Har Habayit. One of the Balei Tosafot, Rabbi Ptachim Regensburg, who was the brother of the Ria Lavan, he writes as well. He came to Eretz Yisrael in the 1200s, and he traveled around in various different locations. And he arrives in Jerusalem, and he writes in his book, and we came to Jerusalem. There was only Rabbi Avram the painter. He basically paid off the king to allow him to live there. And there was a beautiful structure there that was built by the Arabs, when Jerusalem was under Arab rule. And the Jews came to the Melech Yishmaelim. There is one of our elders, who knows exactly the location of where the Beit Hamikdash once stood. And the king searched with him until he found the exact location. And the king was pro-Jewish, and he said, I want to build a sanctuary there. The only people that can pray in the Dome of the Rock? Jews. Unclear if the Jews actually prayed inside. Some say that they did, some say they didn't. Maybe they held like Ravid, maybe they were not to admit. Unclear, maybe they didn't know the halachot. Either way, we have a source from one of the Balei Tosafot that the Dome of the Rock was built as a Bet Knesset for the Jews. Mind blown. If you leave tonight just with that, Yeda, you're already nice. You're ready. Went up a level. In the 1300s, one of the students of the Ramban made it to Jerusalem as well. I guess it was a theme back then that people would travel to these places and record their visits. Over the foundation stone, the Arab king built a massive, beautiful structure. Asuato Beit Tfilah. He made it a Beit Tfilah. It doesn't say for who in this one. Ubanu lemala min habinyan kipa na'amod. On top of that building, he built a beautiful dome. Ve'habinyan al Beit Kachei HaKadashim v'al Eichal. That building stands on the location of the Holy of Holies and the sanctuary itself, the Eichal. Rabbi Vadim Bar Tenuro, the famous Pirush on Mishnayot. In the late 1400s, he traveled to Eretz Yisrael. And eventually, he went all around Eretz Yisrael, to the north, to the south, finally settling in Yerushalayim, where he led the Keilah there for a few years. And what's fascinating is that he writes extensively about the north and various different kfarim that he was at. He makes no mention of Miron. Not a single mention. And he wasn't like there just for a day. Like, he was there for weeks on end. It's clear that in his days, there was no such Mesorah that was the location of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Or we can at least infer that from his words. Anyway, when he gets to Yerushalayim, he writes as follows. Gam chikarti al even shtiya she'aron haya munach aleh. I also was looking into the even shtiyah that the Aron once sat upon. The Rabbim omrim, and the Rabbim say, meaning he's referring to this Mesorah that was handed down for generations. Ki tachat kippah achat gavo v'yafeh asher banu Yishmaelim b'Hamikdash. It's under this beautiful dome that the Yishmaelim built in the Mikdash. V'yiskura toch hakippah shegedolah hi ma'od. It's enclosed within this kippah. V'ish lo yavasham hainu al makom even shtiyah. And people don't go there onto the even shtiyah. In another source, there was a woman in his Keilah that managed to convince the Muslims to take her in, and they praised her, and they were all jealous of her, how she was zochet to go into Har Habayit. Clearly, unlike today, where they would say, they would be not so happy about that. In the 1515, the Ottomans conquered Jerusalem from the Ayyubids. And the Rabbi David ben Zimra, the chief rabbi of Cairo, came to Jerusalem, roughly in the 1530s, and he was asked the question, because at that point, once the Ottomans conquered Jerusalem, they were Muslim supremacists, and they made a rule that no Jews can go to any makomot HaKadoshim. Not Kever David, not any place that was holy to the Muslims and the Jews. Only Muslims were allowed to go. Kever Shmuel HaNavi, all out of bounds. Kever Shimon HaTzadik, out of bounds. One of the things they said also was they prevented Jews from going to Har Habayit. In fact, the Machkema, which is the building right opposite where we leave Har Habayit, which is today a police station, was the Muslim Supreme Council, and there are many court documents that were found in that location where they found different court cases against Jews that managed to go into Har Habayit. But the question came because apparently the Muslims had forced some Jews to go into Har Habayit to clean. And then there was a general ratzon to go and to get close to the Makom Hamikdash. And the halachic question was posed to Rabbi David ben Zimra, who was the Rebbe of the Ari, and Rabbi Yosef Cairo, the Mechaber of the Shulchan Aruch. And he writes in Tshuva as follows: V'zeh ki davar barur shetachat hakippah. It is clear beyond doubt that underneath the dome, Sham Even Ashtiyah, there is the foundation stone, B'li Safek, without any doubt, Hanikra Itzlam Al Tzachra. That is called by them Al Tzachra. And I used to do this when I was single, and I used to go to the Kotel for Friday afternoon. I would get an Arab taxi driver. Now I know better. But back then, I used to always ask them about the Tzachra and the ox. They were all very happy to point out which one was which. It's still called that. Al Tzachra is the Dome of the Rock. And then continues, and then he goes through the entire tshuva of where one, laying out the east, the north, the south, and the west. And then at the end of the tshuva, he writes as follows: Mikom makom en safek ki even azot, that this stone asher tachat hakippah, that's underneath the dome, he even ashtiyah, is the foundation stone asher aleh haya haaron beit kodesh hakodeshim litzan marav, that sat upon it the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies to the west. Hilkach, misher oleh ba'aliyot asher l'roch merav. Therefore, one who goes up to the aliyot that are on the western side, or anichnas lirot me'apetach asher letzad merav, or one who goes into to see by the doorway that is on the west side. Tzarich lishaer sheyeh beino levein hakippah yoter me'echad esayama. He has to make sure that between the Dome of the Rock and where he's standing, there are 11 amot. That was the amount of space between the wall of the Azara and the wall of the actual, the wall of the Heichal and the wall of the Azara was 11 amot. Now this Radvaz, who again is stating without doubt that that's the location, is also brought in the Bach, the Shari Tshuva, Birkei Yosef, Pat HaShulchan, Chavetz Chaim, and many others that we're not going to quote today, or some we might quote, but they're all quoted halacha l'maaseh, relying on this Mesorah, that is the location of the Kodesh HaKadosh. Continues the Radvaz. Therefore, yesh latet tam lemenhag shenogu kol ha'olam la'alot be'otom aliyot lerot misham et habayit kulo. And therefore, we can explain this minhag that all the Jews have to go into Har Habayit, to those areas to see the entire Har Habayit. Shuv ra'iti v'chein amar li b'nei adam hayodim l'shayer she'en l'cha petach v'lo aliyah. There's no petach or aliyah shelo tiyeh rechoka me'akipah kifi asher asher katavti. Meaning there's none of these aliyot or petachs that are within that 11 amot from the west, and also from what he's suggested to the east and to the south and to the north. Therefore, one is allowed to go to the doorways and up onto the ascensions. And what he's referring to is what existed in his day, which is in middle of Har Habayit, there's this elevated platform, and there are certain places on those elevated platforms that people would go on to see. And that is the location he's referring to. Rabbi Zalman Koren and also Rabbi Salaria have gone through the tshuva in depth, pointing out exactly where the various different buildings that the Radvaz refers to. The Marit writes, Mutar likanes sham kishetivol. One is allowed to go into Har Habayit once they go to the mikvah. Lefnim b'Har Habayit, inside Har Habayit. V'kasher zachinu Hashem la'alot v'leot sham et pnei Hashem. As I personally merited to go in. The Chida, as quoted in Birkei Yosef, writes, Mutar leitkarv el petchei Beit Hamikdash v'likanes la'aliyot asher saviv Beit Hamikdash. Also referring to the Radvaz and Paskini halacha l'maaseh. In the 1600s, Rabbi Shaya Horowitz, the Shalach Kodosh, traveled from Europe and made it to Eretz Yisrael. And for a brief period, he resided in Jerusalem. And he received a letter from the Av Bet Din of Krakow, Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Shalom, who wrote to him asking, how did he dare to live in Jerusalem? Don't you know that anywhere in Jerusalem could be the Beit Hamikdash? And maybe where you're living is actually a location of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or in Machane Shechina, and now you're Issur Karet. And the Shla wrote back to him scathingly as follows. No. Ki me'olam lo hayah safek b'makom Beit Hamikdash. We never had a doubt as to the location of the Beit Hamikdash. K'mo she'en safek she'haya Beit Hamikdash, just as there was no doubt that there once was a Beit Hamikdash, v'she'yeh Beit Hamikdash, and there one day will be a Beit Hamikdash, kach en safek b'makom Beit Hamikdash, ki hu zeh. It is right there. They never left our eyesight, even for a second. Even though Jerusalem passed from one ruler to the next, we never had a break into our knowledge of the exact location where the Beit Hamikdash stood. This is one of my favorite Mekorot because it shows how the Breslovers just are Breslovers through and through throughout their history. The Yimei Shmuel Horowitz, who was the rabbi of the Breslov community in Yerushalayim in the 1920s, he writes, is quoting Yimei Shmuel, Ubaboker hishkim halachti lamikvah, and he's talking about on Sukkot, they went to the mikvah in the morning, V'acher kach halachnu la'alot l'regel ad Har Habayit, ad l'makom HaMikdash, ad l'makom shemutar l'tmeimetim lelech bo. We went inside Har Habayit, and this is in the 1920s, mind you. I'm just going to bring you his full lashon because it's too fun not to. Ve'omanu u'mipnei chatoinu melech hachaman, and we said on Har Habayit the tefillot of Musaf, u'mipnei chatoinu melech hachaman, aval akol ba'peh. We have to do everything by heart. To bring a siddur onto Har Habayit, the Arabs wouldn't let. Any of the Mekomot HaKadoshim, they didn't allow us to bring siddurim. Why? Because they were afraid that we might pray to be redeemed, and obviously the prayers would work. Imagine if we would believe the power of our prayers as much as the Arabs believe in the power of our prayers. And even so, we managed to dance and sing. He got so angry. We couldn't do anything. Breslevers are Breslevers. They know how to do it. It's actually interesting that Mordechai Eliyahu, Shmuel Eliyahu said that after we started doing Kishtach Habayit and Har Habayit, they noticed a drop in the number of Muslims that were coming to Har Habayit. And he asked, and the security forces, and they basically told him that once the Jews started doing Kishtach Habayit, the Arabs had Chalishut Hadat, that we're going to start to be redeemed, so they stopped going to the Har Habayit in the same numbers. Clearly, they seem to believe in the power of our prayer. So after going through many of these sources, and again, there's hundreds more that I didn't bring, let's put it all in perspective. Over here, we have an aerial view of Har Habayit. In the center of it is the Dome of the Rock. If we zoom in, we could see the blue line is the Herodian expansion to Har Habayit, the current borders of Har Habayit today. That is the blue line. The original Har Habayit was a square, 500 amah, and putting the Dome of the Rock as the location of the Kodesh HaKodashim, we can now overlay the location of the Beit Hamikdash, and notice how beautifully it overlays with the elevated platform. The elevated platform to the north, to the west, and to the south are sort of parallel with the platform of Har Habayit. The one side that doesn't have the parallel is the east. Now, the Beit Hamikdash, as the Talmud Yerushalmi tells us, needs to be in the cardinal direction of east, because when the sun rises in the morning, the sun shines directly into the door of the Heichal. That's one of the simanim for the Trumat Hadeshem. I've actually had this before, where I've been on the Aish rooftop for nets, both on Shavuot morning and also on what's the name, by Hashan Rabbah, and you actually see the sun rise over the Har and like directly on the east axis to the Dome of the Rock. It's really fascinating to see. Now, obviously, it's not perfect because it depends on where you are in the year, where the sun would be, but it's pretty much always in some direct east axis. And also, we know that the location of the Sirfat Paraduma is on direct east axis on Har Zaytim to the door of the Heichal. So this is how the Beit Hamikdash, using the Mesorah that we mentioned before, that the Dome of the Rock is the location of the Kodesh HaKodashim, we're now able to map out where the Beit Hamikdash stood on Har Habayit. Even more so, when Herod expanded Har Habayit, roughly 80 years before Churban Bayit Sheni, he expanded it to the south, to the north, and to the west. That means when you daven at the Kotel, you're not even davening at the original western wall. You're davening at the Herodian expansion wall. And this is just a tiny sliver of that entire wall, which stretches all the way here. Okay? When one stands at Har Habayit, they're standing over 200 meters, over 700 feet from this corner of the Kotel to the location of Kodesh HaKodashim. Okay? Har Habayit is so massive, you can fit 21 NFL football fields on it. You can fit well over 250,000 people without invoking the Nes that the Gemara tells us that Omdim Tzufim Mishtachim Revachim. Now, when Herod expanded Har Habayit, the one location he did not expand to was the east because of the depth of the Kidron Valley, which means that this wall here is the original wall, or at least built on the Sodot of the original wall. Meaning the original wall of these walls here we're no longer able to access unless we do archaeological digs, which currently, due to the political climate, we can't do. We can actually see the top of this stone here. If you've ever been on Har Habayit and you walk through this corner, you can see the top of this staircase is built on the top of this wall. But the base of the wall you can't see. Now, on the east side, you actually can. And one thing that we actually can see right over here and right over here is this tefer between the walls. If you have a wall, stones are made, interlocking stones, right? But when you get to a corner, you have cornerstones. Now, if you want to extend the wall, you're not going to knock down your original wall. That's going to sort of defeat the purpose. You're just going to build another wall right next to it with interlocking stones. So you can actually see the seam of the wall here. To the left, Herodian stone. To the right, pre-Herodian stone. So as we mentioned, we have Mishnayot Midot, which lays out to the Amma the overlay of the Beit Hamikdash, exactly how large the Ezrat Nashim was, exactly how large the Ezrat Yisrael was, the Ezrat Kohanim, the Heichal, the Makom Bein Olam Mizbeach, how large the Mizbeach was itself. The one thing the Mishnah doesn't tell us is the amount of space between the walls of Har Habayit and the walls of the Beit Hamikdash. And the reason for it is, as we saw in the map before, they weren't parallel to each other because the Beit Hamikdash was on a slant in comparison to the way the Har Habayit is built. The Mishnah tells us, Har Habayit haya 500 amah al 500 amah, rubo min adaro, meaning the most amount of space between the walls of Har Habayit to the walls of the Beit Hamikdash was to the south. Sheni min ha-mizrach, shlishi lo min ha-tzafon, u'miyoto min ha-ma'arav. And the smallest amount of space was to the west. Using that, we can start laying out the exact location. Now, until this point, we relied specifically on the Masorah. But what I'm now going to demonstrate, and this is one of my favorite parts of the entire topic, is how the topography of the mountain doesn't allow the Beit HaMikdash to be anywhere else other than where the Masorah says it is. So even if you wouldn't have the Masorah, and you just had this topography of the mountain, based on everything we know from the Mishnayot, the only place that we could place the Beit HaMikdash would be in the location of the Dome of the Rock. This over here is an actual topography a map of the mountain. Each line is another ridge leading up to the peak of Har Moriah. Now, there are many, many sources as to why the Emin Shetiyah has to be the peak of the mountain, but even putting that aside, let's go through it slowly. From the east of Har Habayit, there has to be a minimum of 294 amot from the wall that the Emin Shetiyah cannot be located inside. Right? Let's do the basic math here. Let's assume that the Beit Hamikdash started right at this very wall, which it didn't, because obviously there was space between the eastern wall and the Beit Hamikdash. So much so that the Mishnah tells us that the second most amount of space was from the east. But let's humor ourselves for a second and assume that the Beit Hamikdash started at this very wall. Let's do the math. Okay? You have the Chel, which is 10 amos. Then the Ezrat Nashim, which is 135 amot. Then the Azara, which is 76 amot. Then the Heichal, which is 73 amot. So if you add that all together, that adds up to 294 amot. So you have to assume that the Kodesh HaKodashim cannot be anywhere within this pink area. Now, to the west, the mountain begins to descend. The blue is where the mountain begins to descend. Now, what we know from the Mishnah and from the Rambam, as I'm going to quote in a second, that there was an ascent from the east to the west of 22 amot plus 3 fingers. There was no descent. So once the mountain starts to descend, that's already a siman that the Kodesh HaKodashim can no longer be at that area. Okay? Let's take a look at what the Mishnah, what the Rambam says. Hamikdash kulo lo haya b'mishar el b'ma'ala hahar. The Beit Hamikdash was not on flat ground, but rather ascended with the ascendant of the mount. I'll give you an example. Over here you have a mountain. At the peak of Har Moriah, that's the Kodesh HaKodashim. But where are you going to build this Beit Hamikdash? Right? You don't have flat ground. So you have two options. Either you can smash the mountain down, now have a flat area to build. That sort of defeats the purpose of it being Har Moriah. The other option is to build retaining walls and build a platform. And that's exactly what Shlomo Melech did. Now, Shlomo Melech didn't cover the entire mountain. As the mountain rose, he covered the mountain and then continued to cover it up. Now, as the Mishnah tells us and as Rambam enumerates here, there were a certain amount of steps. Now, there was no halacha Moshe Sinai that the steps had to be where they had to be. It was just practical. As the mountain rose through this amount of steps, so too the areas rose with it. Once one person would enter the eastern side of Har Habayit, they would walk on flat ground until they would get to the Chel. Once a person would go to the Ezrat Nashim, they would go up 12 stairs. Each one was half an amo. And they would go the entire area of the Ezrat Nashim on equal ground. ועולה ממנו לעזרת ישראל שהוא תחילת העזרה ב-15 מעלות. and they would go up to the famous 15 stairs of the Shir Ma'alot. Rum kol ma'alech chatzi ama v'shelcha chatzi ama. Each step was a half an amma. U'ma'alech kol ezrat Yisrael b'shaveh, and the entire ear of the Ezrat Yisrael, which was 11 amot, was on equal ground. V'olam mimenu le'ezrat ha'kohanim b'ma'ala gvoa ama v'aleh aduchan. Yesh bo shalosh ma'alot. They would go up another 4 steps. They were all either half, rum kol ma'alech chatzi ama v'shelcha chatzi ama. Each one of the steps were half an amma with the exception of the duchan, which was an amma. Aptly named because the kohanim with duchan on it. Nimtzet Ezrat Kohanim Gavoa Shel Yisrael Shteim Amot V'Mechza. That the Ezrat Kohanim was slightly higher than the Ezrat Yisrael, 2.5 amot. U'ma'alech kol Ezrat HaKohanim v'Hamizbeach u'bein ha'olam v'Hamizbeach b'shaveh. All that area was flat ground. V'olam mimenu l'ulam b'shneim esrei ma'alot. To enter into the actual building of the Eichal would enter in another 12 steps. Rum kol ma'alech chatzi ama v'shelcha chatzi ama v'olam v'Eichal kula b'shaveh. Nimtza gova karka Eichal al karka shar mizrach shel Har Habayit 22 amot. So there's 22 amot. You have to rise from the east to west, an ascension of 22 amot. And this is just Rambam's Ksav Yad, where he actually maps out the steps as well. Okay? So going back to that, to our to our topography, there's no way, once it starts to descend here, we could assume that the Emin Shatiyah cannot be in that area. Now, to the south, there's 250.5 amot that the Beit Hamikdash that the Kodesh HaKodashim cannot be. Why? Because we said Ruba min Adarom. Now 500 amot, split that in half. That's 250 amot. Add a half an amma just so you have Rubo Rov. Now you have 250 amot that the Beit Hamikdash cannot be in the yellow. And once the Har begins to descend on the north into the Beit Zita Valley, you already have an area where the Beit Hamikdash can't be in that area as well, because there is no descent inside the Hazara itself. Which means that you have 77.5, which is half of the 135 amot of the Hazara, and the 10 amot of the Chel to the northern descent. So once you have there, from the descent point, meaning here's where the descent started, here's your 75.5 amot. That means the only area where the Kodesh HaKodashim could potentially be would be in this small little white area. That leaves a tiny amount of Har Habayit to actually match up with the Mesorah of placing the Beit Hamikdash in the peak of the mountain, which is in the center. Therefore, says Rambam, and I apologize for the time, we're going to try to speed this up. Lefikach, mishalchin et ha-metzorah chutz l'gimel ha'achanot shu chutz l'Yerushalayim. One sends out a Metzorah out of the 3 camps. Mishalchin zavim v'zavot nidot v'yeladot chutz l'shtei machanot shu chutz l'Har Habayit. Tamemet afilo amet atzmo mutar l'ikanes l'Har Habayit. Even a dead body itself is allowed to be in Har Habayit. Shenemer vayikach Moshe tzatmot Yosef imo b'machaneh ha'Leviyah. So, Jerusalem can have a Metzorah, Machaneh Leviyah. The Har Habayit itself can have a Zav and a Balkari with a onish of Malkut. And Machaneh Shechina Doraita is just the area of the Hazara itself. Okay. So what is Tumat Zav? Zav encompasses 5 types of Tumah. Zav, Zava, Nida, Yoledet, and Keri. These are all Tumah Sheyatzah min haguf. Of all these Tumot, a Zav, which is today known as either gonorrhea or prostatitis, it's a type of sickness that is basically an irregular discharge. From those type of things, a person needs to, if he becomes tamei, he needs to eat zayin nikim and then go to a mayim chayim. The rest of the tumot, which is zava and nida, basically the same. One is regular, one is irregular discharge. A yoledet is after a woman gives birth, and a balkari is a normal discharge from a man. All of those need a mikvah. Once one goes to a mikvah, obviously for women, for nida and a ziva, we're machmer today since the times of the Gemara, to treat every nida as a zava as well, so they have to wait zayin nikim as well. But once they go to a mikvah, they are now tahor, and they are allowed to go into Har Habayit. So, just to recap, we do not have the Parah Adumah today. Not yet. Therefore, it is strictly forbidden to go into Machaneh Shechina. Midoraita, that includes the area of the Hazara. Midorabanan includes the area of the Chel. The rest of Har Habayit is completely mutter, permitted for a tamemet to enter into. Now, if a zav who goes to Mayim Chayim and a zava, nida, yoledet, and keri that goes to a mikvah, they are perfectly allowed to enter Machaneh Leviyah. By the way, these are parot adumot, just in case anybody didn't know that. Some people think that there's some magical creature, fire truck red. They are not. This is standard cows. This, Letzari Lavonati, I once had to go to America for Pesach, and we went on a chalamot trip to a zoo in upstate New York, and I saw parot adumot, and I took a picture of it. And these are the parot adumot that are currently located in Shiloh. And hopefully they will have babies that will be kosher for parot adumah. Because it's very difficult to keep a parot adumah kosher, because once you have it, even if it's completely red, you have to keep it for 2 years, where another animal doesn't climb on it, or a bird doesn't land on it, or there's not one hair that is either white or black. It's very difficult. So currently, there's one that's a safek. They're holding on to it, and b'shat l'tchak, they'll use it, but they're rather to get a fully kosher parot adumah. But we could do a class on that at a different time. Those who go to Har Habayit today, as we mentioned, the only area that is forbidden is this area here, Midoraita, with a karet. The rest of it, obviously, I'm a Haredi, so we're going to avoid going into the Machane Shechina D'Rabbanan. The only area is the red area, which is roughly 13% of Har Habayit. The other 87% of Har Habayit is mutter to go if one prepares properly. Now, the white line is the route that we take. We come up to the Kotel, we go up the bridge, onto Har Habayit. Some are even more stringent, they follow this route here. But usually we go up over here. Right over here we have a Beit Knesset, where we daven. We have a minyan for Shacharit and for Mincha. Bezrat Hashem, soon we'll be zochet to have minyanim for Arvit as well. And then over here we have a Beit Midrash, where we sit and we learn. And then we continue along, and sometimes we get to go up here, but mostly we continue along this path and out. So you can see this path, which has been designed specifically by the Rabbanim, in conjunction with the Israeli police. It is physically impossible to enter into an area of Karet if you go up to Har Habayit as part of these groups. And if you try to leave the route, they will stop you. Okay, so after everything we went through, we saw very clearly that it's pretty much an open shut case that is perfectly permitted to go to Har Habayit. So why do so many people think you can't go to Har Habayit? So this is a very brief chart that I made, going through every source from the Sefer HaMasoret L'Makom HaMikdash, throughout all the generations of people that mention either the Masorah or the fact that they went themselves. And I wrote an article in English about it, with all the sources as well. If anybody wants, I can scan the QR code and read it. It will take you a while, though. It took me about 4 months to write it. But as you can see, there's so many sources. So as we mentioned, the Ottomans, once they conquered Jerusalem, they made it very difficult for Jews to go into Har Habayit. Rabbi Chaim Alpandi writes, "V'tzarich le'odiyah b'zman hazeh, im mutar manu likanes toch Har Habayit, v'af she'hagoyim ein manichim otanu likanes sham mipnei shu beit tefillah shelem v'yesh sakana b'davar." So here we have a source of someone saying that, yes, halachically, one who goes to Har Habayit, there are mitzvot that one can be mekayim on Har Habayit, but sadly, it's just physically impossible for us to go right now because the goyim don't allow us to.
Is it
That's the Ottomans will put you in jail. Yes. We find this similarly in Mishkanot Le'avir Yaakov, which is roughly in the 1800s. Here it says as well, V'af al kol panim hayu nechnasim achshav la'arbayit b'makom shu mutar leikanes. Meaning he says, halachically it's mutar to enter. V'avi mekayim mitzvot moreh mikdash shelo yikanes b'maklo. Then one can actually do the mitzvot of moreh mikdash. Ma she'en ken kivan she'en nechnasim achshav klal. Just unfortunately nowadays we cannot go in at all. Afilu b'makom shemutar leikanes mitam she'ei efshar klal leikanes sham ad she'yiten reshut me'hamamishala. The government doesn't allow us to go in. So halachically it will be permitted. Not only that, there's mitzvot to be mekayim, but we just can't physically do it. So yet another source. And post 1967, when people started going to Har Habayit, once the paratroopers conquered Har Habayit, people were going everywhere on Har Habayit. And Rabbi Avad Yosef, who was one of the known signatories against people going to Har Habayit, he wrote as follows: "Elu shenechnasim va'avonot harabim heim lo sholim dat, lo sholim chachma. Nechnasim afilu lemeskad Omar shesham vadai hayita azara." They're entering into the Dome of the Rock, which was vadai the azara. מה דעת יש לה אם נכנסת במקום כרת, בבית קדשי הקדשים? נכנס במסגד עומר בפנים. They're entering specifically into that building. Now, sadly, my grandmother, her neshama should have an aliyah, has a picture of herself in the Dome of the Rock, post 67. It was a classic thing. People would go, they didn't know the halacha, they were going wherever they went to. So of course the Rabbanim came and wrote that people should avoid going to Har Habayit as a result. And it's not the first time that happened. But what we see from Rabbi Ovadia Yosef's words, specifically from the words here, he had no doubt as to the location of Kodesh HaKodeshim. What does he write? Bevadai hayita azara. The Dome of the Rock is vadai the location of Azara. So if you know where the Beit Hamikdash is, you technically can map out where the area was. The issue was that even though they mapped it out, people were still going. And that's why he wrote that people should stay off. Although Rameir Mazuz said on video that Rabbi Ovadia has given people who knew the gvulot of where to go, that they should go to Har Habayit. And therefore we have the Gemara in Eruvin. Omalei Rav, Bika Matzah v'gadal ba gadel. He found a vineyard and he built a fence. Rashi explains there, it's referring to the non-learned people who are mizalzin in mitzvot. And therefore the rabbi set up a siyuk for them to keep them away from avera. Just as someone builds a fence around a vineyard to safeguard it. And therefore, of all these kol koreh that people vote against going to Har Habayit, as we see from Rav Kook and from many Rabbanim, post 67, I bring the edut from the grandson of Rav Yitzchak Cohen Kook, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. We have the edut from Rav Shlomo Ranan, Hashem Yikom Damo, who writes as follows: Mitzaref ani bezel lekiriyat Rabbanim hamamlisim la'alot Har Habayit b'mekimot hamutarim, ki ze davar barur lelo tzel shel safek. כי הסבר רבינו הרב, אברהם יצחק הכהן קוק, ובנו הרב צבי יהודה קוק, זכר צדיקים לברכה, לא אסרו לעלות במקומות המותרים. They never forbade entering into the permitted areas. ובוודאי, מצווה גדולה לרשת אל המקום המקדש מידי זרים, ואף ורק באופן המותר. You can only do it in the permitted ways. And I found this gem in Osot Rav Yitzchak Cohen Cook, a conversation between Rav Cook and the British general during the Kufa where Cook was the chief rabbi of British Palestine, and the Sar was talking to him, and he says, and he asked him, Amarta, they say in your name, shepresamta hazara lemevakim hayudim shelo lalechet leshetach hacharam. They say in your name that you put out a warning that the Jews should not go to the Temple Mount. And Rav Cook answers him, Hitkavanti rak leshetach habeit hamikdash ha'atik. I only meant the actual area of the Beit Hamikdash, meaning Machane Shechina. And not only that, he clarifies itself because of its inherent holiness. Yes, it's holier. And just so I understand, says the British general, meaning there's a specific tumah there. And Rav Cook answered him, Mikivan shamakom hu kodesh, the place is holy. Yesh tzorach b'tara miyuchedet. Para aduma. You need para aduma. Now, where do you need para aduma to go into? Not Machane Leviyah. Only Machane Shechina. So we have, from Rav Cook's own words, plus the edut from his grandson, the Rav Cook's ban on going to Har Habayit, even though his Gabayim wrote, his Gechaziz wrote that it's including the entire Har Habayit, was clearly only meant the area of Machane Shechina. And on the flip side, you have many mechtavim from the Rabbanim promoting going up to Har Habayit, from various Rabbanim. We're not going to go through all of them, but the Rabbanei Yesha, Yehuda v'Shamron, and Aza, back in the day. You have writing from Rav Nachum Mekuver. You also have Rav Moshe Feinstein Shuva, where he writes as follows: Hayesh makom b'Har Habayit shemutarim tmei metim likanes l'sham af mid'Rabbanan shu ad acher sheyeh lefnim me'asoreg harei mutar mikol tzad af b'maravi likanes tmei metim ad asoreg sheyeh rochev eza amot. And we know that Rav Moshe Feinstein has his son-in-law, Moshe Tendler, and many of his students as well, including Reb Chaim Ozachet, Yeshivas Migdal, who is currently also the dean of Yeshivat Har Habayit, who goes up regularly. They also have the letter from Reb Dov Lior. Reb Shruya Dublinsky, one of the Talmidim of the Chazon Ish, wrote a letter to Rav Ovadia Yosef, convincing him of the great merit to build a Beit Knesset on Har Habayit, in the place that would be Machane Leviyah, according to all, so that people can go and daven on Har Habayit. Also, we have a letter from Rabbi Tzil Mutzafi, one of the leaders of the Sephardi Kehillah, who writes, Mitzvah Rabbahi lishtadel v'latzil kol sheniten mishetach Har Habayit hamikudash v'letpalel sham al hapedut v'hagedulah. Amazing. And we have the leader of the Ed Charedit himself, Rabbi Yankov Fisher, who wrote an entire tshuva about building a Beit Knesset on Har Habayit and why one does not have to be choshesh for Tumat Ziva. And a list of over 200 Rabbanim, Rashi Keilot, Rashi Yeshuvim, Rabbanim Yeshuvim, Rashi Yeshivot v'chadome, all who signed on the great mitzvah to go up to Har Habayit Bizman Hazeh. We're going to fly through the last chilek of the presentation. Now that we've seen that it's been mutar to go to Har Habayit, but what's the reason, right? Obviously, we discussed it as the place from the dawn of time, as the place of ultimate connection of prayer, of hitkarvut. But there's also 5 mitzvot. There are 5 mitzvot d'oraita that one can be mekayim on Har Habayit today. One is the mitzvah of Har Hamikdash. Et shabtotai tishmaru mikdash tiro ani Hashem. Rambam explains how one can accomplish this mitzvah. Mitzvah tasei liyara min hamikdash. How does it done? You should not enter with your walking stick or with dust on your feet or with a money bag, or you should walk with a handkerchief with money in it, and obviously you can't spit on Har Habayit, and you should go in with properly dressed, and you shouldn't make Har Habayit a shortcut. And kol zeh liyara min hamikdash. Now, what is Rambam trying to teach us here? People would think, how do you do Har Hamikdash? By avoiding the Mikdash. What do you mean? Best way to do Har Hamikdash is just to not go. But that's like a person saying, you know how I'm going to do Mora Avicha V'imecha? I'm just going to avoid them. That's it. Well, they live in I'm just going to run away. Obviously, we can all realize on a rational level that avoiding your parents is not Mora Avicha V'imecha. It's hafuch. That's the greatest zilzal of the mitzvah. So how does one treat the mikdash with awe? By actually going to the Beit Hamikdash and treating it with awe. So don't go up and treat it with disrespect. Go and actually elevate the experience. When you go up and you go to daven, to closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're bringing kedusha to the makom. Another mitzvah that's very important to do on Har Habayit today is the mitzvah of avodah b'mikdash. As the Rambam writes, v'mitzvah chamishit hi, the 5th mitzvah, shetzivanu la'avoda yitale, kfar nichpel, zeh hatzivoi pamayim ba'amro, v'avadati et Hashem Elokechem, ve'amar ve'oto ta'avodu. And basically he says, avodo b'torato, serving him with his Torah, v'avodo b'mikdasho, serving him in his mikdash. Klomar, how does one accomplish that? Says the Rambam, la'lechet sham litpalel bo v'negdo, k'mo shebiya Shlomo alav hashalom. Going to Har Habayit, to daven on there, is the kiyum of the mitzvah d'oraita of avodah b'mikdash. According to Rambam, one who goes to Har Habayit is actually doing tefillah de'oraita. There's a machloket in the Achronim, if someone davens shacharit at the Kotel and then goes up to Har Habayit, if they have to daven again. Because their previous tefillah was a tefillah de'rabanan. Once they went up to Har Habayit, now they have a mitzvah de'oraita. Now, also included in this mitzvah of avodah b'mikdash is the great mitzvah of hishtachavaya. This medrash is so important. I'm going to read its entirety. I know we're short on time, but it's so powerful. Says the medrash in Bereshit Rabbah, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Hakol b'schut hishtachavaya. Everything happens in the merit of prostration. V'Avraham lo chazar ma'Moriah b'shalom el b'schut hishtachavaya. Avraham did not come back from Akedat Yitzchak in peace, only due to the fact that he did hishtachavaya. Shenemar v'nishtachaveh v'nashuva aleichem. Yisrael lo negalu el b'schut hishtachavaya. Am Yisrael did not deserve to return to be redeemed from Mitzrayim except in the schut hishtachavaya. Shenemar vayimayen ha'am vayikedu vayishtachavu. HaTorah lo nitna el b'schut hishtachavaya. We only received the Torah at Har Sinai because we did hishtachavaya. Shenemar v'hishtachavite merachok. Chana lo nifkeda el b'schut hishtachavaya. Chana did not have her son Shmuel only b'schut hishtachavaya. Shenemar v'aya b'yom hahu yitaka. I'm sorry, I skipped over there. Shenemar v'yishtachvu shem la'Hashem. Hagoliot eino mitkantzot el b'schut hishtachavaya. Am Yisrael never returned from the Goliot only b'schut hishtachavaya. Shenemar v'aya b'yom hahu yitaka b'shofar gadol uva'u av l'meretz lashlo v'neidachem b'eretz Mitzrayim v'yishtachavu la'Hashem b'har hakodesh b'Yerushalayim. Beit Hamikdash lo nivneh, the Beit Hamikdash will not be rebuilt, ela b'schut hishtachavaya. Shenemar, Romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lehar kadsho. Hametim, in Tchiyat Hametim, eino chayin, ela b'schut hishtachavaya. Shenemar, bo'u nishtachaveh v'nechra'a nevecha lefnei Adonai Osenu. So anybody who goes to Har Habayit today and has the actual merit, the schut of doing hishtachavaya, realize that all of everything that we're coming to do to get to the Skula Hatita is contingent on this mitzvah of hishtachavaya. This picture was actually taken on Yom Kippur, I think, in 2007.
The Issur of Ishtaf Havaya Michutz L'Mikdash.
That is
Like Pishat Marglaim
on at the masket is
right. But at what point does it start? Because we're not allowed to go into the Azara. So
right. So it's we actually had an entire month of limud and yeshivat Har Habayit going through that sugya. All the rabbanim learned it up and gave their thing. We had a mini Sanhedrin on the Har that ruled. The consensus of Acherav Lahatot in this particular topic was that that Hishlach Havaya is mutar anywhere within the Chamesh Me'ot Amma HaMekudash of Har Habayit. Anywhere on the rest of Har Habayit, which is a Safek B'tz Mekudash, we do it with a heker. Well, there's something separating between your face. But the actual mitzvah is not only in the Azara itself, but also on Har Habayit itself. And the third mitzvah that one could do on Har Habayit, which is someone saying, okay, very nice, if I'm on Har Habayit, I could do these mitzvot. But where's the mitzvah to go to Har Habayit? Says the pasuk, Ki im el makom asher yivchar Adonai Elohechem mikol shivtechem lasum et shmo sham leshechno tidreshu uvata shama. There's a specific mitzvah to go to Har Habayit to seek out the Shekhinah of Hashem. The Ramban quotes as well the tam l'shechnot tedeshu. The reasoning behind this mitzvah: shetelchu lo meretz merachkim. You should come from afar. V'teshalu anu derech Beit Hashem. Ask on your way, where is Har Habayit? Just as Elkanah did on his way to Aliyah Regel in the Mishkan in Shiloh. V'atomer ish l're'ehu, and everybody should tell their friends, L'chu v'nale el Har Hashem el Beit Elokei Yaakov. Let us go up to the Mount of Hashem, to the house of Elokei Yaakov. Kelashon tzion yishalu derech hinei pneihem. The last two mitzvot are Lo Techanem B'Hashem et Haaretz. They're all in Eretz Yisrael, but not Miyuchad for Har Habayit. But of course, Har Habayit itself. But there's one much more deeper meaning about going to Har Habayit. Yes, you can do all these mitzvot. But what about our actual national aspirations? Many people think that the Beit Hamikdash is unattainable. It's not something for us to do. But that's blatantly false, as we'll see in the sources. We have a mitzvah d'oraita, ve'asu mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. We have a chiyuv d'oraita to build Beit Hamikdash. Rambam himself writes as follows. Mitzvah aseh לעשות בית להשם והכל חייב לבנות ולסעד בעצמם ובמעונם אנשים ונשים כמדרש במדבר. Everybody has a requirement to partake in this mitzvah. Rambam in Sefer Mitzvot writes as well, והמצווה ה-20 היא, the 20th mitzvah, שציוונו לבנות בית עבודה, והוא אמר איתלה ועשו למקדש. And Rambam in the Hakdamat Perish Mishnayot explains the reason why we even have Mishnayot Midot, והתועלת בכך, כשיבנה, when we will build it, we have to keep the actual layout of the Beit Hamikdash. Why? Says the Sfat Emet. This is actually really very powerful Sfat Emet. It's in Parshas Terumah, Tov Reish Mem. He writes, "Gam v'asu limikdash, gam apirush kipshuto." Exactly as it sounds. Just as when the Am Yisrael will awaken their hearts for this. We could raise money and build the temple. Just as it happened in the times of David HaMelech. Just as it happened in the times of Ezra. Just as will happen in the future when we reach the final redemption. Just as we have a real yearning to do it, we'll be able to do it. This is that it says, and so you should do for all generations. Do it Terumah and build me a Mikdash. There's a mitzvah for all generations to build the Beit Hamikdash. And therefore Chazal tell us, the generation that the Beit Hamikdash is not built is as if they destroyed it. Why? And the reason for that, that if we didn't build the Beit Hamikdash, it means that we didn't truly want it. So Chazal's words of Kol Doshein Beit Hamikdash Nivneh B'yamav Kilu Necharav means the onus is on us to truly want it. Because if we truly wanted to build the Beit Hamikdash, we'll find a way to do it. The problem is that we keep thinking that it's something for Mashiach to do. However, the Yerushalmi says the exact opposite. Omer Rabbi Acha. This is the Gemara in Yerushalmi, Maaseh Sheni, Perek Bet, Perek Halacha Bet. Omer Rabbi Acha. Zot omeret, shebeit Hamikdash atid libanot, kodem lemachut Beit David. The Beit Hamikdash will be built before the coming of Mashiach. The Shla Kodesh writes this as well. All the nuvot, the kima of the nuvot that we learned throughout the Sifrei Tanakh, they're not going to happen only when the Gula happens, but rather it will be a slow build up till they come true. As we found in the Yerushalmi, that the Beit Hamikdash will be built before the coming of Malchut Beit David, just as it's referenced by Rashi and many other places. There's a whole source. I don't know if I can go through like an hour of sources just on this topic alone. That the Beit Hamikdash is built and Mashiach is not here. And that's why Chazal, actually, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Parachelik, actually references the Seder of the Gula according to the Seder of our Tefillah. First is Baruch Hashanim. All of a sudden, Eretz Yisrael, which is barren, starts to give fruit. To the point where today we're winning awards for our wines. What's after Baruch Hashanim? The Kabbah Shofar. Am Yisrael returns in large numbers to Eretz Yisrael. What happens after the Kabbah Shofar? Hashiva Shofteinu. Right? We establish a state. What's the purpose of the state? To ala tzadikim v'lam shinim. To punish the Rishayim and raise up the tzadikim. What comes afterwards? We return to Yerushalayim. What happens literally 19 years after the state of Israel is founded? We return to Jerusalem. And what happens afterwards? We haven't done that yet. And only afterwards, Tzemach David. So Chazal, when they set up the Seder of the Geula, specifically set it up that the Beit Hamikdash comes as a step before the Mashiach. So everybody says, we want Mashiach, right? We truly want Mashiach. We want the Beit Hamikdash. Well, if you really want Mashiach, get working, guys. There's an amazing medrash that was also made famous by Yossi Green and Mordechai David, but it shows us something really powerful. Shanu Abotenu, B'shasha Melech HaMashiach Nigla, Ba ve'omed al gag Beit Hamikdash. He stands on the roof of the Beit Hamikdash. V'hu mashmiע lahem liYisrael ve'omer, Anavim, higia zman geulatchem. The time of your redemption has arrived. V'im ein atem ma'aminim. If you don't believe me, Ru'u b'or yeshazerech alechem. See the line that shines forth. She'emer kumi ori kivo orech u'chvod Hashem alach. So what's going on? Let's analyze this midrash for a second. Mashiach is revealed. Where does he stand? On the roof of the Beit Hamikdash. And he starts calling out to Am Yisrael, Anavim, higia zman geulatchem. So what happened? The Beit Hamikdash just fell from Shemaim? Then hayetachen ve'emin atem aminim. Someone's not going to believe. They literally just saw a nes happen. Rather, what's pshat in the midrash is that we went and we built the Beit Hamikdash, and the Charedim and the Eitz Nakim are still blocking traffic in Jerusalem, shouting Kares. And then Mashiach comes and tells them, Rabbi Yisrael, he gets man gulaschem. Wake up, kum yeri kivarich. As Minchas Chinuch writes, "V'gam hayom efshe shemitnu amalchiyot v'shul levinot Beit Hamikdash mitzvah v'livnot." This is obviously he's writing in a time when the Goyim controlled Eretz Yisrael, not in a time that we control Eretz Yisrael. K'mavar b'midrash b'mei Rabbi Shua ben Chananya denasnu rishot v'tchilu livnot v'adayin b'sefer kabot tumarim she'Rabbeinu Yechiel b'al tosavot v'retzeh lalech l'akriv korban Yerushalayim imkein hu adin livnot Beit Hamikdash. The Rambam writes, and this is actually a midrash Mishnah in Idiot, "Makrivin korbanot kulan afal pi she'en sham bayit banoi." That if we have the opportunity and the ability to bring korbanot, we have a chiyuv to build korbanot today. Etc., etc. Basically, we can bring all the korbanot even without a Beit Hamikdash. Rabbi Yashiv, when it was bringing, and they brought in the question about bringing korban Pesach, he writes, כי באמת, על פי ההלכה אפשר למצוא תשובה ופתרון לכל שאלה בעניין הקרבת קורבן פסח, הן בנוגע לבירור המקום המדויק של המזבח, והן במציאות כהני חזקה מובהקים, ובהכנת בגדי כהונה לפי כל השיטות ועוד כיוצא בדברים, ואף ידי תכון עמם לנכבד בזה. So Rabbi Yashiv, notice from his words, he writes, we know exactly where the Makom HaMizbeach is. So clearly you knew exactly where the Beit HaMikdash was still, and you knew exactly where the Machanot were. I'm going to end with this very, very powerful words of the Minchas Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda al-Kagalei was one of the, together with the Jewish Tzion, Rabbi Tzvi Kalisher, he was the Sephardi equivalent, a big Makubal from Spain, and he writes as follows. Al Beit HaMikdash b'Yerushalayim yibaneh al yedei tzadikim lefnei Mashiach. The Beit HaMikdash will be built by the hands of the tzadikim before the coming Mashiach. Ve'omer, and one who says, Shereshit ha'geula tiyah al yedei Mashiach ben David, and one who suggests that the Geula will start with Mashiach, as is known through many of the Amei Haaretz, Harehu Kamisha Omer is as if one is saying, Shekodem Or HaBoker Yizrach Hashemesh, that before the morning starts, the sun already is set. Shehem B'Telim U'B'Butalim, Their words are null and void. והרעה הגדולה הזאת הנמשכת מן הדת הנפסדת הזאת היא דבר מוגש וניסיון לכיח. And these terrible words that are point out and pushed out, great harm comes from it. והדבר הזה מצווה לאומרו בפני עמי הארץ. It's a great mitzvah to teach the tzibur that the Beit Hamikdash will be built before Mashiach. וברוך המקדש שמו ברבים. Amen. Thank you, hopefully. ולפי דעתי, says Rabbi Yehuda HaKagalai, המסתיר את הדבר הזה, one who knows this and still chooses to hide it and not tell the tzibur, הוא מחלל שם שמיים בסתר, is desecrating the name of God. So over here we can see this is just now some nice pictures. This is the Obam Mishpacha. This picture was taken in the early 2000s. When we first started Yeshivat Har Habayit, which is when we started this small learning group, this is Rabbi Yosef Obam giving a Torah class. Tiny little groups. The first thing we got was this permission to sit at this spot and talk. You notice a famous journalist in the picture. This is Rav Ralbach giving a shir. And then we finally started bringing up Dapei Torah. This is Rav Elisha Wolfstrom here. Where's Rav Hadley? I don't see. No, not that I know of. We founded the yeshiva, and the purpose of the yeshiva. This picture was taken a few days ago, where we're now able to sit with chairs in the Beit Midrash and learn to be Mekayim Ashrei Yeshevei Veitecha Od Yalu Chasela, and also to be Mekayim Shifti Beveit Adonai Kol Yimei Chayei Lachzot B'Noam Hashem Ulevaker B'Echalo. Large groups. Every Rosh Chodesh we have the zchut of hearing from Rizal Ariel, one of the paratroopers who conquered Har Habayit, and he comes up and he leads the whole group over the Yeshivat Hamikdash, and he makes the bracha of Baruch She'asa Li Nes B'Makom Hazeh. Every 30 days he can make it. And this is also already in the Beit Hamikdash with Shishtach Havaya. This was the very first day, I remember this day clearly, the first day that they allowed us to stand and daven mincha without bothering us. This is roughly around 2017, if I remember correctly. It's actually my father-in-law. This is the first time on Har Habayit, right this over there. And we were able to just stand. We weren't allowed to shako, we weren't allowed to move our lips, but we were able to come up. And that led to continuing davening to the point we were able to incorporate Bechat Kohanim and davening. This was actually one I think in 2021 on Chol HaMoed. And the minyanim have grown larger and larger. Baruch Hashem. Rizal Ariel. Even in the rain, even in the snow. I don't have a picture of in the snow. Actually, I do have it, but not in this presentation. Some famous podcasters. We now have the ability to bring up Dapei Torah and Tefillah, which is a major development. And where's the Shishtach Havaya, as we see. Now, this video here is a video of a campaign for Yeshivat Har Habayit that I made. The purpose is not to raise money. The purpose is to just showcase a little bit how things were and how things are now.
והיו צועקים ומשתפים את העולים. כמו שראינו פה שבימים שהר הבית סגור ליהודים, אז הדגלי פלסטין תלויים על כיפת הסלע. כנגד זה מגיע קביעות אחרת. ישיבת הר הבית זוכה לעשות מהפך אדיר. אט זוכים ליצור בשטח מצב חדש. מצב שלא היה 2000 שנה. תפילה יהודים בהר הבית. את המהפך הגדול הזה אנחנו חייבים להמשיך ולהעצים. בהר הבית אין ואקום. זה או שיש שם את אויבי ישראל שמחרפים ומתגייסים וקוראים לרצח יהודים, כשאנחנו שם, כשישיבת הר הבית שם, יש תורה, יש קדושה, יש תפילה. בימים האלו בואו כולכם ותהיו שותפים, תהיו חלק מהדבר הקדוש הזה, הנשגב הזה, להשיב את השכינה לציון. ברוך השם שיש לנו בשטח הר הבית.
Baruch Hashem, and this is long before we even had Shishtach Havaya. So If we take out anything from this Torah class that we had today, is that everyone that comes to Har Habayit adds to the future of the Geula. It continues forward because this mitzvah to build Beit Hamikdash, to bring the Shekhinah back to Har Habayit, is not a tzibor. It's not a mitzvah on the Yachid, but rather on the tzibor. It's a mitzvah for all of us. Am Yisrael, to come to Har Habayit, to be Mekadeshim Shemo, Barabim. And we've seen this. When we started this Kviyut, roughly 9 years ago, with Yeshivat Har Habayit, started at a time where we weren't able to do anything. We used to literally sit at the entrance to the Har on the bridge. We would maybe say some Mishnayot. Once we got on Har Habayit, we even moved our lips. They would give us problems. We used to daven. We would say, "Ashrei Yeshvei v'tech od yaluch hasela," and he would reply back, "Ashrei Yam shekachal Hashem alakav." That's how we davened. And we were, if we stopped, if we even just stood like this, they would move us along. And slowly but surely, because we had Kviyut, and a lot changed during COVID as well. There were times where we were the only group on Har Habayit. And we continued to come day in and day out to the point we were able to push the envelope. We developed a relationship with the police. Obviously, the Sar Itamar Ben Gvir, once he came in and he was able to move things along a lot forward in this particular regard. But it all started by putting a placeholder down. When Am Yisrael is kavua in our Makom Hamikdash, we will able to earn the rights to be able to serve Hashem there. But if we avoid the place and we continue to hope our enemies will take care of us, we could ask Yonatan exactly what every house in Gaza has in their salon. A picture of the Dome of the Rock. They know what this is about, and they know the only thing that gives them koach to continue to fight against us is the knowledge that we avoid our natural destiny. We're afraid of it, but if we stand up and say no. It's our time. We're in we're in a generation that never existed. Our great-grandparents dreamed for the day that we will have the zchut that we have today. The achariyut is calling on us. Kumu v'nale el Beit Hashem Elokei Yaakov. Thank you very much.